Preface. A treasury of Eskimo tales. The central Eskimo live away up north in that great American archipelago which lies between Hudson Bay, Baffin Bay, and the Arctic Ocean, an archipelago in which the islands are so large, so numerous, and so regular in outline that, as one looks at a map of them, he could fancy they were chunks of the continent which had been broken to pieces by some huge iceberg that bumped into it. The land is ice-bound during so much of the year that the inhabitants cannot depend upon getting a living by the cultivation of the soil, and have to subsist almost entirely upon meat which they get from reindeer, seal, bear, whale, and walrus. In summer their clothing is of sealskin and fishskin, and in winter it is of the thicker reindeer hides. Their life is a hard one owing to the rigorous climate, and they make it harder by their superstitions, for diseases are supposed to be cured by charms and incantations of the shaman or priest, and everything in the way of hunting, fishing, cooking, or of clothing themselves must be done in a prescribed way, or it is taboo or hoodoo, as the Negroes say. When you read The Baby Eskimo you will see just a tiny bit of the hardships, but I should not like to tell you how much more terrible a time he might have had if he had happened to be a girl baby. By referring to the table of contents you will note that the first group of tales were told by the central Eskimo. The second group were derived from the Eskimo living along Bering Strait to the west, and it is interesting to compare many of these folk tales along similar subjects. The writer is indebted to the 6th Ethnological Report issued by the U.S. government for many of the legends found in the central Eskimo group, and to the 18th report for many of those from Bering Strait. She wishes to express her thanks for this invaluable and unique material. The Baby Eskimo. The little Eskimo way up in the northern part of British America has a pretty hard time of it, as you may know when you think how cold it is there. He is born in a snow hut, and when he is but a few hours old he is carried on his mother's back out upon the ice, and around in circles, and after a while through deep snow back to the hut. If that does not kill him, the names he gets are enough to do it, for he is given the names of all the people who have died in the village since the last baby was born. He sometimes has a string of names long enough to weigh any baby down. Worse than that, if one of his relatives dies before he is 4 years old, that name is added to the rest and is the one by which he is called. Worse still, if he falls sick he is given a dog's name, so that the goddess Setna will look kindly upon him. Then, all his life, he must wear a dog's harness over his inner jacket. If he should die, his mother must rush out of the house with him at once. If she does not do so, everything in the house must be thrown away or destroyed, just as is done when a grown person dies in a furnished house. For a whole year his mother must wear a cap if she steps outside her door, and she must carry his boots about with her. After 3 days she goes to his tomb and walks around it 3 times, going around to the left, because that is the way the sun travels. While she walks, she talks to the dead child and promises to bring him food. A year after his death she must do this again, and she must do the same thing whenever she happens to pass near the grave. Now we shall tell you some of the tales which the Eskimo mothers relate to their children. The first one is about Kvyung, the Rip Van Winkle of the Eskimos. Kvyung, an old woman, lived with her grandson in a small hut. She had no husband to take care of her and the boy, and they were very poor. The lad's clothing was made of the skins of birds which they caught in snares. Whenever the boy came out of the hut to play, the other boys would call, "Here comes the bird boy, fly away, birdie," and the men would laugh at him and tear his clothes. Only one man, whose name was Kvyung, was kind to the boy and tried to protect him from the others, but they would not stop. The lad often came to his grandmother crying, and she would console him and promise him a new garment as soon as they could get the skins. She begged the men to stop teasing the child and tearing his clothes, but they only laughed at her. At last she became angry and said to the boy, I will avenge you on your tormentors. I can do it by making use of my power to conjure. She poured water on the mud floor and said, "Step into this puddle, and do not be frightened at anything that happens." He stepped into it, and immediately the earth opened and he sank out of sight, but the next moment he rose near the beach and swam about as a young seal with a wonderfully smooth, shining skin. Someone saw him and called out that there was a yearling seal close to shore. The men all ran to their kayaks eager to secure the beautiful creature. But the boy's seal swam lustily away as his grandmother had told him to do, and the men continued to pursue him. Whenever he rose to the surface to breathe, he took care to come up behind the kayaks, where he would splash and dabble in order to lure them on. As soon as he had attracted their attention and they had turned to pursue him, he would dive and come up farther out in the sea. The men were so interested in catching him that they did not observe how they were being led far out into the ocean and out of sight of the land. It was now that the grandmother put forth her powers. Suddenly a fierce gale arose. The sea foamed and roared, and the waves upset their frail vessels and plunged them under the surface. When they were drowned, the little seal changed back into a boy and walked home over the water without wetting his feet. There was no one left now to torment him. Kivayang, who had never abused the boy, had gone out with the rest, but his kayak did not capsize. Bravely he strove against the wild waves and drifted far away from the place where the others had gone down. There was a dense fog and he could not tell in which direction to go. He rode for many days not knowing whither he was going, and then one day he spied through the mists a dark mass which he took to be land. As he pulled toward it, the sea became more and more tempestuous, and he saw that what he had supposed to be a rocky cliff on an island was a wild, black sea with a raging whirlpool in the midst of it. He had come so close that it was only by the utmost exertion he escaped being drawn into the whirlpool and carried down. He put forth all his strength, and at last got away where the waves were less like mountains. But he had to be constantly on the alert, for at one moment his frail craft was carried high up on the crest of billows, and the next it was plunged into a deep trough of the sea. Again he saw a dark mass looming up, and rowed toward it, hoping to find land. But again he was deceived, for it was another whirlpool which made the sea rise in gigantic waves. At last the wind subsided, and the sea became less rough, though the whitecaps still fought around him. The fog lifted, and at a great distance he saw land, real land this time. He went toward it, and after rowing along the coast for some distance he spied a stone house with a light in it. You may be sure he was delighted to come near a human habitation again. He landed and entered the house. There was no one in it but one old woman. She received him kindly and helped him to pull off his boots, and she hung his wet stockings on the frame above the lamp. Then she said, "I will make a fire in the next room and cook a good supper." Kivyung thought she was a very good woman, and he was so hungry that he could scarcely wait for the supper. It seemed to him that she was a long time preparing it. When his stockings were dry, he tried to take them from the frame in order to put them on. But as soon as he touched the frame, it rose up out of his reach. He tried in vain several times, and each time the frame rose up. He called the woman in and asked her to give him his stockings. "Take them yourself," she said. There they are, and went out again. Kivyung was surprised at the change in her manner. He tried once more to take hold of his stockings, but with no better result. Calling the woman in again, he explained his difficulty and said, "Please hand me my boots and stockings, they slip away from me." "Sit down where I sat when you entered my house, then you can get them," she replied, and left the room. He tried once more, but the frame arose as before, and he could not reach it. He knew now that she was a wicked woman, and he suspected that the big fire she had made was prepared so she could roast and eat him. What should he do? He had seen that she could work magic. He knew that he could not escape unless he could surpass her in her own arts. He summoned his mascot, which was a huge white bear. At once there was a low growl from under the house. The woman did not hear it at first, but Kivyung kept on conjuring the spirit, and it rose right up through the floor, roaring loudly. Then the old witch rushed in, trembling with fear, and gave Kivyung what he had asked for. "Here are your boots," she cried. "Here are your slippers. Here are your stockings. I will help you put them on." But Kivyung would not stay any longer with the horrid creature, and dared not wait to put on his stockings and boots. He rushed out of the house and had barely gotten out of the door when it clacked violently together, catching the tail of his jacket, which was torn off. Without stopping to look behind, he ran to his kayak and paddled away. The old woman quickly recovered from her fear and came out swinging a glittering knife which she attempted to throw at him. He was so frightened that he nearly upset his kayak, but he steadied it and arose to his feet, lifting his spear. "I shall kill you with my spear," he cried. At that the old woman fell down in terror and broke her knife, which she had made by magic out of a thin slab of ice. He travelled on for many days, always keeping near the shore. At last he came to another hut, and again a lamp was burning inside. His clothing was wet and he was hungry, so he landed and went into the house. There he found something very strange, a woman living all alone with her daughter. Yet the daughter was married, and they kept the son-in-law in the house. But he was a log of driftwood which they had found on the beach. It had 4 branches like legs and arms. Every day about the time of low water they carried it to the beach, and when the tide came in, it swam away. When night came, it returned with 8 large seals, 2 being fastened to each bough. Thus the log provided food for its wife, her mother, and Kivyung, and they lived in abundance. Kivyung became rested and refreshed after his weary travels, and he enjoyed this life so well that he remained for a long time. One day, however, after they had launched the log as they had always done, it floated away and never came back. Then Kivyung went sealing every day for himself and the woman, and he was so successful that they wished him to remain with them always. But he had not forgotten the home he had left long ago, and meant to return to it. He was anxious to lay in a good stock of mittens to keep his hands warm on the long journey, and each night he pretended to have lost the pair he wore, and the women would make him another pair from the skin of the seals he brought home. He hid them all in the hood of his jacket. Then one day he too floated off with the tide and never came back. He rode on for many days and nights, always following the shore. During the terrible storm he had been out of sight of land all he ever cared to be. At last he came again to a hut where a lamp was burning, and went to it. But this time he thought it would be well to see who was inside before entering. He therefore climbed up to the window and looked through the peephole. On the bed sat a woman whose head and whose hands looked like big yellow and black spiders. She was sewing, and when she saw the dark shadow before the window she at first thought it was a cloud. But when she looked up and beheld a man, she grasped a big knife and arose, looking very angry. Kivyung waited to see no more. He felt a sudden longing for home, and hastily went on his way. Again he travelled for days and nights. At last he came to a land which seemed familiar, and as he went farther he recognized his own country. He was very glad to see some boats ahead of him, and when he stood up and waved and shouted to them, they came to meet him. They had been on a whaling excursion and were towing a large dead whale to their village. In the bow of one of the boats stood a stout young man who had harpooned the whale. He looked at Kivyung keenly, and Kivyung looked at him. Then, of a sudden, they recognized each other. It was Kivyung's own son, whom he had left a small boy, but who was now become a grown man and a great hunter. Kivyung's wife was delighted to see him, whom she had supposed dead. At first she seemed glad, and then she seemed troubled. She had taken a new husband, but after thinking it over she returned to Kivyung, and they were very happy. The giant in days of old, an enormous man, lived with other members of the Inuit tribe in a village beside a large inlet. He was so tall that he could straddle the inlet, and he used to stand that way every morning and wait for the whales to pass beneath him. As soon as one came along, he used to scoop it up just as easily as other men scoop up a minnow, and he ate the whole whale just as other men eat a small fish. One day all the natives manned their boats to catch a whale that was spouting off the shore, but he sat idly by his hut. When the men had harpooned the whale and were having a hard time to hold it and keep the boats from capsizing, he rose and strolled down to the shore and scooped the whale and the boats from the water and placed them on the beach. Another time, when he was tired of walking about, he lay down on a high hill to take a nap. "You would better be careful," said the people, "for a couple of huge bears have been seen near the village." "Oh, I don't care for them. If they come too near me, throw some stones at me to waken me," he said with a yawn. The bears came, and the people threw the stones and grabbed their spears. The giant sat up. "Where are they? I see no bears. Where are they?" he asked. There, don't you see them?" cried the Inuit. "What, those little things? They are not worth all this bustle. They are nothing but small foxes." And he crushed one between his fingers and put the other into the eyelet of his boot to strangle it. Kalapaling. Polopoling is a strange being who lives in the northern seas. His body is like that of a man, except that his feet are very large and look like sealskin muffs. His clothing is made of the skins of eider ducks, and as their bellies are white and their backs are black, his clothes are spotted all over. He cannot speak, but cries all the time, "Bee, bee, bee, bee." His jacket has an enormous hood, which is an object of fear to the Inuit, for if a kayak upsets and the boatman is drowned, Kolopoling grabs him and puts him into the hood. The Inuit say that in olden times there were a great many of these creatures, and they often sat in a row along the ice floes like a flock of penguins. The numbers have become less and less, till now there are but a few left. Anyone standing on shore may see them swimming underwater very rapidly, and occasionally they rise to the surface as if to get air. They make a great noise by splashing with their feet and arms as they swim. In summer they like to come out and bask on the rocks, but in winter they sit along the edge of the ice or else stay underwater. They often chase the hunters, so the most courageous of the men try to kill them whenever they can get near enough. When the Kalapaling sits sleeping, the hunter comes up very cautiously and throws a walrus harpoon into him. Then he shuts his eyes tight until the Kalapaling is dead, otherwise the hunter's boat would be capsized and he'd be drowned. They dare not eat the flesh of the creatures, for it is poisonous, but the dogs eat it. One time an old woman and her grandson were living alone in a small hut. They had no men to hunt for them, and they were very poor. Once in a while, but not often, some of the Inuit took pity on them and brought them seal's meat and blubber for their lamb. One day the boy was so hungry that he cried aloud. His grandmother told him to be quiet, but he cried the harder. She became vexed with him and cried out, "Ho, Kalapaling, come and take this fretful boy away." At once the door opened and Kalapaling came hobbling in on his clumsy feet, which were made for swimming and not for walking. The woman put the boy into the lodge hood, in which he was completely hidden. Then the Kalapaling disappeared as suddenly as he had come. Iron by the Inuit caught more seals than usual and gave her plenty of meat. Then she was sorry that she had given her grandson away, and was more than ever sorry that it was to Kalapaling she had given him. She thought how much of the time he must have to stay in the water with that strange man-like animal. She wept about it, and begged the Inuit to help her get him back. Some of them said they had seen the boy sitting by a crack in the ice, playing with a whip of seaweed, but none of them knew how to get him. Finally one of the hunters and his wife said, "We may never succeed, but we will see what we can do." The water had frozen into thick ice, and the rise and fall of the tides had broken long cracks not far from the shore. Every day the boy used to rise out of the water and sit alongside the cracks, playing and watching the fish swim down below. Clara Paling was afraid someone might carry the boy away, so he fastened him to a string of seaweed, the other end of which he kept in his hand. The hunter and his wife watched for the boy to come out, and when they saw him, they went toward him. But the boy did not want to go back to live with his grandmother, and as they came near, he called out, "Two men are coming, one with a double jacket, the other with a foxskin jacket." Then Clara Paling pulled on the string, and the boy disappeared into the water. Some time after this, the hunter and his wife saw the boy again, but before they could lay hold of him, the lad sang out, "Two men are coming." And again Clara Paling pulled the string, and the boy slipped into the water. However, the hunter and his wife did not give up trying. They went near the crack and hid behind the big blocks of ice which the tide had piled up. The next time, when the boy had just come out, they sprang forward and cut the rope before he had time to give the alarm. Then away they went with him to their hut. As the lad did not wish to return to his grandmother, he stayed with the hunter, and as he grew to be a man, he learned all that his new father could teach him, and became the most famous hunter of the tribe, the woman magician. Long ago, in Ego, a country where nobody lives nowadays, there were two large houses standing far apart. In each of these houses, many families lived together. In the summer, the people in the two houses went in company to hunt deer and had a good time together. When fall came, they returned to their separate houses. The names of the houses were Kern and Exalak. One summer, it happened that the men from Kern had killed many deer, while those from Exalak had caught but a few. The latter said to each other, "They are not fair. They shoot before we have a chance," and they became very angry. "Let us kill them," said one. "Yes, let us kill them, but let us wait till the end of the season, and then we can take all the game they have in their storehouse," said the others. For the game was packed in snow and ice and was taken home on dog sledges when the hunting was over. When it came time to go home, both parties agreed to go on a certain day to the storehouses and pack up the game ready to start early in the morning. This was the time for which the men of Exalak had been waiting. They started off all together with their sledges, but when they got a long distance from the camp and very near to the storehouse, those from Exalak suddenly fell upon the others and slew them, for the men from Quern had never suspected that there was any ill feeling. Fearing that if the dogs went back to camp without their masters, the women and children would guess what had happened, they killed the dogs also. When they returned, they told the women that their husbands had separated from them and had gone off over a hill, and they did not know what had become of them. Now one of the young men had married a girl from Quern, and he went to her house that night as usual, and she received him kindly, for she believed what she had heard about the men of her party straying off. She and all the other women thought the men would soon find their way back, as they had hunted in these parts so long that they knew the land. But in the house was the girl's little brother, who had seen the husband come in, and after everybody was asleep he heard the spirits of the murdered men calling, and he recognized their voices. They told him what had happened, and asked the boy to kill the young man in revenge for their deaths. So he crept from under the bed and thrust a knife into the young man's breast. Then he awakened all the women and children in the great row of huts and told them that the spirits of the dead men had come to him and told of their murder, and had ordered him to avenge them by killing the young man. "Oh, what shall we do? What shall we do?" they cried. "They have killed our men and they will kill us." They were terribly frightened. "We must fly from here before the men from Exalak awaken and learn that the young man is slain in revenge," said one of the old women. "But how can we fly? Our dogs are dead, and we cannot travel fast enough to escape." "I will attend to that," said the old woman. In her hut was a litter of pups, and as she was a conjurer, she said to them, "Grow up at once." She had no fairy wand to wave over them, but she waved a stick, and after waving it once, the dogs were half grown. She waved it again, saying, "Be full grown instantly," and they were. They harnessed the dogs at once, and in order to deceive their enemies, they left everything in the huts and even left their lights burning, so that when the men arose in the morning, they would think that they, too, had arisen and were dressing. When it had come full daylight next morning, the men of Ixalec wondered why the young man did not come back to them, and presently they went to find out. They peeked into the spy hole of the window and saw the lamps burning, but no people inside the hut. They discovered the body of the dead man, and then when they looked, they saw the tracks of sledges. They wondered very much how the women could have gone away on sledges, since they had no dogs, and they feared some other people had helped them to get off. They hastily harnessed their own dogs and started in pursuit of the fugitives. The women whipped their dogs and journeyed rapidly, but the pursuers had older and tougher animals and were likely to overtake them soon. They became very much frightened, fearing that they would all be killed in revenge for the death of the young man. When the sledge of the men drew near and the women and children saw that they could not escape, the boy who had slain the man said to the old woman, "The spirits of our murdered men are calling to us to cut the ice. Cannot you cut it?" "I think I can," she answered, and she slowly drew her first finger across the path of the pursuers, muttering a magic charm as she did so. The ice gave a terrific crack, and the water came gushing through the crevasse. They sped on, and presently she drew another line with her finger, and another crack opened, and the ice between the two cracks broke up, and the floe began to move. The men, dashing ahead with all speed, could scarcely stop their dog team in time to escape falling into the open water. The floe was so wide and so long that it was impossible for them to cross, and thus the women and children were saved by the art of their conjurer. The bird wife, Isijong, one of the Inuit tribe, was vexed because a young woman would not marry him, so he left his home and travelled far away into the land of the birds. He came to a small lake in which many geese were swimming. On the shore he saw a great many boots. He cautiously crept near and stole a pair and hid them. Presently the birds came out of the water, and finding a pair of boots gone, they were alarmed, and quickly forming into two long lines with their leader at the point where the lines met, they flew away crying, "Honk, honk, honk." But one of the flock remained behind, crying, "I want my boots, I want my boots." Itajon came forth from his hiding place and said, "I will give you your boots if you will become my wife." "That I will not do," she replied. "Very well," he said, and turned around to go away. "I don't want to, but I will be your wife if you will bring back my boots," she called. He came back and gave her the boots, and when she put them on, she was changed into a woman. They walked away together and wandered down to the seaside, and as she liked to live near the water, they settled in a large village by the sea. Here they lived for several years and had a son. Itajon became a highly respected man, for he was by far the best whaler in all the Inuit tribe. One day they killed a whale and were busy cutting it up and carrying the meat and blubber to their homes. Many of the women were helping, but though Itajon was working very hard, his wife stood lazily looking on. "Come and help us," he called to her. "My food is not from the sea," she replied. "My food is from the land. I will not eat the meat of a whale, neither will I help." "You must eat it, it will fill your stomach," said he. She began to cry and said, "I will not eat it. I will not soil my nice white clothing." She went to the beach and searched for feathers. When she found some, she put them between her fingers and the fingers of her child. They were both turned into geese and flew away. When the Inuits saw this, they cried, "Itajon, your wife is flying away." Itajon became very sad. He no longer cared for the meat and blubber, nor for the whales spouting near the shore. He followed in the direction his wife had taken, and went over all the land in search of her. After travelling for many weary months, he came to a river where a man with a large axe was chopping chips from a piece of wood. and as fast as he chopped them they were turned into salmon and slipped out of the man's hands into the river and swam down to a large lake nearby. The name of the man was Small Salmon. As Itajong looked at the man, he was frightened almost to death. The back of the man was entirely hollow, and Itajong could see right through him and out at the other side. He was so scared that he kept very still and crept back and away out around him. He wanted to ask if the man had seen his wife, for that was what he asked everyone he came to. So he went around and came from the opposite direction, facing the man. When Small Salmon saw him approaching, he stopped chopping and asked, "Which way did you approach me?" "I came from that direction," said Itajong, pointing in the way he had last approached. "That is lucky for you, for if you had come the other way and had seen my back, I should have killed you at once with my hatchet." "I am glad I don't have to die," said Itajong. "But haven't you seen my wife? She left me and came this way." "Yes, I saw her. Do you see that little island in the large lake? That is where she lives now, and she has taken another husband." "Oh, I can never reach her," said Itajong in despair. "I have no boat and do not know how to reach the island." "I will help you," said Small Salmon kindly. "Come down to the beach with me. Here is the backbone of a salmon. Now shut your eyes. The backbone will turn into a kite and carry you safely to the island. But mind you, keep your eyes shut. If you open them, the kite will upset." "I will obey," said Itajong. He closed his eyes, the backbone became a kayak, and away he sped over the water. He heard no splashing and was anxious to know if he really was moving, so he opened his eyes a trifle. At once the boat began to swing violently, but he quickly shut his eyes, and it went unsteadily, and he soon landed on the island. There he saw a hut, and his son playing on the beach near it. The boy, on looking up, saw and recognized him, and ran to his mother, crying, "Mother, father is here and is coming to our hut." "Go back to your play," she said. "Your father is far away and cannot find us." The lad went back, but again he ran in, saying, "Mother, father is here and is coming to our hut." Again she sent him away, but he soon returned, saying, "Father's right here." He had scarcely said it when Itajong opened the door. When the new husband saw him, he said to his wife, "Open that box in the corner of the hut." She did so, and a great quantity of feathers flew out and stuck fast to them. The hut disappeared. The woman, her new husband, and the child were transformed into geese and flew away, leaving Itajong standing alone. The spirit of the singing house. The singing house of an Eskimo village is used also for feasting and dancing, and always has a spirit owner who is supposed to remain in it all the time. Once a woman was curious about the spirit and wanted to see it. For a long time she had wanted to know more about the spirit of the singing house, but the villagers warned her that she would meet with a terrible fate if she persisted in trying to see it. One night she could wait no longer, and went into the house when it was quite dark so the villagers would not see her go. When she had entered, she said, "If you are in the house, come here." As she could see and hear nothing, she cried, "No spirit is here, he will not come." "Here I am, there I am," said a hoarse whisper. "Where are your feet?" she asked, for she could not see him. "Here they are, there they are," said the voice. "Where are your shins?" she asked. "Here they are, there they are," it whispered. As she could not see anything, she felt of him with her hands to make sure he was there, and when she touched his knee, she found that he was a bandy-legged man with knees bent outward and forward. She kept on asking, "Where are your hips? Where are your shoulders? Where is your neck?" And each time the voice answered, "Here it is, there it is." At last she asked, "Where is your head?" "Here it is, there it is," the spirit whispered hoarsely. But as the woman touched the head, all of a sudden she fell dead. It had no bones and no hair.